If the cheaters knew what kind of karma they were in for, I'm sure there would be less cheating in our lives. So, the husband found out about his wife's shocking act and began to notice red flags in her behavior. Will he reveal a secret affair and take revenge? Let's listen to this story and find out. Recently, I came across a video of my wife at a friend's bachelorette party. She was seen with 2 dancers. The video was secretly filmed by another woman at the party using her Mold M phone. Later, this woman shared the video with her boyfriend. He turned out to be a mutual school acquaintance of mine. We weren't friends, but our paths had crossed in the past. The woman who shot the video told her boyfriend to keep it a secret, and he did for many years. It's worth noting that I never got along with this guy. We were just ordinary acquaintances. However, after he broke up with the woman who shot the video, he started showing it to his friends as there's an amusing anecdote to this. The video became a constant topic of discussion at parties and gatherings of guys, who found it very amusing. It's worth noting that most of the women in the video were in relationships at that time. I couldn't shake the feeling that they were laughing at me and the other guys, but maybe it was just my imagination. I don't think anyone told me or my close friends this story until about a month ago. One of our mutual friends had a drink with this guy and the story came up. He started joking about how his ex, my girlfriend, captured a scene at a bachelorette party where a group of girls were having a good time and 2 dancers were having an affair with one of the women. She was my girlfriend then and is my wife now. It seems that at that time he had trust issues with his girlfriend, so she decided to record everything as proof of her innocence in case he accused her of cheating. She turned to her friends for help to prove her loyalty to him. Our mutual friend said, in this situation, all the women, including the one who was recording, went backstage to the dancer's dressing room. My girlfriend was the only one who gave it her all. She not only engaged in intimacy with an outsider but also was with both dancers at the same time in their dressing room, while her friends focused on intimacy and display. She was involved with both dancers. The other woman was secretly recording what was happening about a month ago. My friend found out about this situation and thought for a long time about whether it was worth telling me. He was reluctant to tell me because he knew about my happy marriage and maintained a close relationship with both of us. He understood the power of our love for each other, especially because we have 2 little daughters, aged 2 and 4. Almost 2 weeks ago on Friday, my friend contacted me wanting to talk about something important. From the seriousness of his tone, I decided that this was a serious problem. He was facing a serious problem and needed someone he could trust. Our friendship, which began at school, has been characterized by mutual support. The next day, we agreed to meet at the bar. When I arrived, I noticed that he was already there, looking preoccupied. It was clear that he was troubled by something, and I suspected that it had more to do with me than with himself. I grew up in a rough neighborhood. I'm a big guy and I've had several run-ins with the law. In the past, my reputation was largely based on my involvement in the activities of the team. However, that's all in the past now. I've always been seen as a natural leader among my peers, and many have turned to me for advice. When I was younger, I was known for being quite aggressive and having a lot of fights. However, multiple stays in prison, marriage, and fatherhood have changed me for the better. It's been over 8 years since I last got into trouble. I've become less aggressive, more balanced, and have matured significantly. I have 2 children and a full-time job as an electrician in a trade union. I'm currently working as an electrician in a trade union. I'm still really close with one of my old friends. We met in high school and he always had my back when I was bullied. Now he's 29 and works for a corporation, but we don't see each other much. When I sat down at the bar, I could tell from his body language that he wanted to say something about me. It made me feel anxious meeting his gaze, so I asked about his well-being. He told me that he was having trouble in his marriage and that he felt he had to be honest with me to protect our relationship. He finally revealed his secret a couple of weeks ago during a chance meeting with friends. The video showed my wife in the dressing room with 2 dancers. I was blown away. I felt a whole range of emotions: anger, confusion, and shame. Part of me wanted to argue with my friend, hoping that this was all a joke. But deep down I knew that this was a harsh reality. I clearly remember the day 5 years ago when my wifey suggested we go to a friend's bachelor party. At the time, we'd been together for about 7 months but hadn't moved in together yet. My girlfriend came from a traditional Irish Catholic family and was very beautiful. I loved her deeply, so my first thought was to protect her honor and reputation. In the past, I might have reacted strongly. My friend mentioned this to me, and maybe that's why he didn't tell me about it earlier. I have a history of anger, so I asked my friend if he had the video. He said it was on his friend's phone, but he had only seen part of it. I doubted his words because usually people don't watch only part of a video, but at that moment, this detail was not the most important. I knew my friend wouldn't bring me there just to play a cruel joke about my wife's infidelity. It would be too risky with a man like me. So I asked him how I could contact the guy with the video. He said he could arrange everything. I asked if I could get this guy's phone number. My friend went outside to make a call. When he returned, he said my friend said the guy wasn't responding but had sent a message. He promised to keep me in the loop as soon as he got a reply. At first, I thought about leaving the bar and calling my wife, but my friend advised me to take my time and think about everything carefully before doing anything rash. I decided to stay at the bar and talk to I told my friend about my relationship with my wife, which had been great up to that point. I never expected her to be involved in something like this at the very beginning of our relationship. She showed wild tendencies, but I didn't realize how wild they could be after that first year. It seemed to me that she had changed her views and left her party days in the past. However, alcohol still brought out that side of her, despite being in a serious relationship. She attended a bachelorette party where things got out of control. She'd had alcohol problems in the past, but she managed to get them under control, especially after our first daughter was born. My friend received a message from the guy with the video. I got in touch with him right away to see if we could meet and get a copy of the video on a USB stick. He said he was out of town but would be back the following week. I told him I wanted to see the video and asked about compensation for deleting it from his phone or other storage devices. I was hoping he would delete it on his own, but he asked for $1. I've never liked him, and that was one of the reasons why. I managed to negotiate a price reduction to $1. $100, there didn't seem to be any reason for him to keep the video. My wife and his ex-girlfriend were no longer friends, and his ex I don't think his girlfriend would hurt him. I think he was just acting like a jerk, but I was glad that he asked for money because it allowed us to draw up a legal agreement prohibiting him from publishing the video. I wanted to remain the sole owner of the only copy so that I could protect my wife, daughters, and myself from further shame. The idea that a recording of my wife could spread on the internet would be a serious disgrace to my family. I wanted to control the situation as much as possible so that I could deal with it. My wife later told me that the video is too explicit to even think about. I was too drunk to drive that night and had to take a cab home, leaving my car in the parking lot of the bar. When I got home, I could barely squeeze through the door. All I remember is that I called my wife names and then I blacked out. I wanted to argue with her that night, but I was too drunk to handle it. The next morning, I woke up hungover on the couch wrapped in a blanket. My wife was supposed to go to work that day, but she called in because my wife was worried about my strange behavior and wanted to talk about what was going on. She gave me a glass of water and asked me what was wrong. When I looked at her, I saw images of the night before and I felt really angry at her. I hadn't felt like this in a long time. I couldn't even find the words to speak. I just started crying uncontrollably. I tried to remember the last time I'd cried. It was a really dark moment. There have been times in my life when my wife has looked confused and started crying too, wanting to comfort me with hugs. But I've pushed her away, feeling disappointed. She's asked me over and over again what was the matter. Finally, I admitted that there was a video circulating on the internet showing her with 2 dancers at a bachelorette party 5 years ago. Initially, she was confused and quickly denied the accusation, insisting that it was a fake. Despite her protests, I reminded her of a particular party and asked if she had been there. She admitted that she had been there. She said she was there but strongly denied all accusations of infidelity. She said the video was fake, but I thought maybe she was too drunk to remember what happened. She said she didn't remember being with two men and asked to see the video as proof. I said the person with the video was away, but I wanted to believe her. She seemed convinced at first that she wasn't in the video. I thought this might be a scam to get $1,000. I didn't want to send any money, but the amount seemed too small for such a scheme. I really wanted to see the video to make sure my wife was honest. The person who texted me said he would be back on Tuesday, but today was only Sunday, and I felt restless. The video was on my mind, and my wife's strange behavior at home was also a concern. My anxiety levels were rising, and it seemed like she was trying to make me look paranoid or fabricate the whole situation by Monday. I was getting impatient, so I offered to send money through Cash App and have the video uploaded via Dropbox. The person said they didn't have space on Dropbox to post the video, so I suggested creating a new account, which they did by Monday evening. I had transferred $1. I sent him another $100 via Cash App. In response, he sent me a link to the video. When I watched it, I was shocked to see a group of women, including my wife's old friends, applauding the dancers. I was even more shocked to see my wife indecently touching the dancers through their clothes. Then the video moved to the dressing room, where my wife and two other women were kneeling and helping the dancers. There were about 5 men present. If you understand my point, in another part of the video. In the video, my wife performed explicit actions while remaining fully clothed. 2 dancers took turns with her. The video was poorly shot, but it was clear that it was her. Her voice was unmistakable. This intimate moment, which I thought was just between us, was shared with strangers. The dancers seemed to know they were being recorded, but they didn't mind. I couldn't tell if my wife and her friends knew about the camera because they weren't paying attention to it. In some cases, she was the one who sought attention and took the initiative. She was happy to spend time with a group of guys she'd just met that evening, but when I first met her, she seemed more reserved. When we started dating, I didn't see her as a pure angel because she was known as a party girl. She made me wait about 2 months before we had an intimate relationship, so I never suspected anything else about her. I've been thinking about my wife being questioned in our current relationship. Her closeness to me is very important, especially after the birth of our second daughter. Yet she freely participates in intimate acts with strangers without experiencing any hesitation. I just need to express my disappointment because I always believed that there are special moments that can be shared with a loved one. But now it seems to me that this faith has been shattered. My self-esteem has taken a real knock. I used to think I was good enough for her, but it seems like I no longer satisfy her needs. I've gained weight lately, but I used to be in great shape. I consider myself attractive, but despite this, she chose to be with someone else. I wonder if anyone else has been through something similar. My wife was almost perfect until I saw this video. She is a great mother to our children and takes care of me. She's not lazy like the other unfaithful wives I've heard about. She's very traditional now, although she wasn't like that when we first started dating. When we first started dating, it was tough to just drop everything. They were protecting themselves, although it doesn't matter. She was so caught up in it that she probably wouldn't have noticed if they hadn't been using protection. I remember perfectly well how she insisted on using protection. When we first had sex, it made me really respect her, but now I'm starting to doubt our relationship. Maybe I don't know her as well as I thought. Could she have had other partners I don't know about? She seemed so convincing. She denied being in the video, but I saw it, so I don't believe her. When she came home that evening, I turned on the video to see if she'd show any signs of remorse or apology. Instead, she seemed to have. She had her excuses ready. She even said that at that time we didn't have an exclusive relationship and that we weren't even in a relationship at all. I was stunned and couldn't resist responding. Even though she may have been right about us not having an exclusive relationship at that time, we both know that this is not true. It's not normal to have such intimacy with 2 men. The person she introduced herself to me as and has continued to behave as since our first meeting is not like the one I see on the video. She then changed her story again, blaming her actions on being drunk and claiming that alcohol made them take advantage of her. I pointed out that she was clearly a willing participant and that there was not a single moment in the video when she resisted. In response, she stated that the video was altered and inaccurately reflected the situation. She also explained her behavior by citing alcohol consumption, although she was a bit drunk but still spoke clearly, moved normally and didn't slur her words. But she kept making excuses and avoiding responsibility. I didn't get into an argument with her, but it seemed like she was sharing responsibility when I told her about this. She got upset and said it shouldn't bother me because we were just friends with benefits and not in a serious relationship. She argued that her past shouldn't be held against her and asked me to think about how I'd feel if she judged me based on my past. She told me I should accept her for who she is and asked why I couldn't do the same for her. I've never had an aggressive relationship, but her refusal to take responsibility for her actions almost pushed me over the edge. I didn't want to disturb my children's sleep and couldn't stand her presence that night, so I decided to leave home. I took a few things with me and found shelter with a colleague to calm down and prevent any actions that I might regret. I was already on probation, so I decided to change something. I packed up my regular and work clothes and went to stay with a single friend. My wife kept calling to come home, but I decided to ignore her. I knew I'd have to face this eventually, but I was too upset to be around her. She sent me messages saying I wasn't ready to forgive her for past mistakes. She also brought up how she'd forgiven me for spending almost a year in prison for aggravated assault and 10 years on probation, which stopped me moving forward in life. My wife went to college and works as a physical therapist, but I didn't pursue higher education. I can earn more by I was working as an electrician in the union during the day and doing additional lucrative projects in the evenings and after work. It began to seem to me that our marriage was turning into a farce. I didn't know who my wife really was. I didn't expect her to be perfect when I proposed, knowing that everyone has I always thought she was a typical party girl, but her undisclosed story seemed excessive to me. I remember asking her about past relationships and she stated that she had only had 5 boyfriends, which I realized was a lie considering what happened at the bachelorette party. I knew about 3 of her ex she'd had boyfriends and 2 brief affairs, so who knows how many more there were despite all this. I still believed that we had a strong relationship, but doubts crept in when I wondered what other lies she was telling me. I was left at a loss and didn't know what to believe. Everything in my life seemed to be collapsing around me. I couldn't spend much time with her. I had to go back to my house because there were important electrical projects and deadlines waiting for me there. My house was not just a place to live, it was also a warehouse and office for all my equipment, so I couldn't avoid going back for a while, even though I was feeling depressed. I had to go back 2 days later to look after my kids and meet the deadline for I didn't even consider divorce or legal separation. I was still trying to make sense of everything that was happening and felt depressed. I suddenly lost the feeling of hunger and felt a deep desire to trust someone. My father has always been a reliable source of support in difficult times, although in my youth I ignored his instructions, which led to some difficulties as I grew up. I learned to appreciate his advice more as I got older. I decided to go to my father and tell him about my current situation. He was surprised because he didn't expect my wife to be like this. He knew about her past difficulties, similar to my own. My parents love my wife very much. They believe she has a positive impact on my life. She has a talent for presenting herself in a favorable light to them, which they appreciate. People who know her might not see her this way unless they are close friends. My father, who has been married to my mother for 36 years, shared some thoughts about relationships. He mentioned that things were different in their time, especially due to the lack of social media, which now expands women's circles of communication with men and provides more ways to seek validation outside their immediate environment. Women today can attract attention from men around the world through social media. I realized this phenomenon when I discovered my wife's online accounts, but I'll talk about this later. My father urged me to return home and ensure a stable presence in the family, especially for the well-being of the children. After our chat, he told me to approach my wife with an open mind and without judgment to reduce her defensive reaction. If she was willing to make an effort, he said, We could work on reconciliation in the future. He also said that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and that if my wife is capable of deceiving me, there's no guarantee that another woman won't do the same. He acknowledged that it would be difficult to get over what had happened, but suggested that if forgiveness proved too difficult, I should start considering other options. After our conversation, I felt more determined. After coming home and taking my daughter to kindergarten, my wife asked for a private conversation. I suggested we talk later in the evening, noticing tears swelling up in her eyes. I didn't feel much sympathy for her since she didn't admit her guilt. I received a message from a friend saying that he had deleted the video and no longer owned it. I couldn't confirm this, but I took his word for it. I also told him that I would send him some legal documents as we agreed. When I got home that evening, my wife was already there. I expected her to. She finally admitted that she'd been unfaithful and lied to me at the start of our relationship. When I approached her, she was sitting on the balcony, but when I looked at her, she seemed completely different. My idea of her collapsed. I used to think I was the only person burdened with a difficult past, but now I realized that everyone knew about my difficulties. Despite this, I'm ready to take responsibility for my mistakes. When I got home, I found her on the balcony where we often talked. The weather in Massachusetts was usually pleasant in the summer. It was a great place to relax. She said hello, but I didn't respond. I went inside to take a shower and change my clothes. A moment later, I went back to the balcony with a beer and joined her in peaceful silence. I decided to give her my word and wait to see what else she had to say. I felt like she was expecting me to ask a lot of questions, but I thought it would be better to let her get things out in the open. She started by admitting she'd been unfaithful, saying it was a phase in her life. She also said that at the start of our relationship, she wasn't sure it would last and she was still young. She told me about some awful parties she'd been to and said she'd been faithful to me since we met, but I couldn't understand how she could have had intimate relationships with other men on the same evening she met them. I'd been waiting for months for her to start a relationship with me. Despite saying she wasn't ready, she explained her actions by saying she wanted our first time together to be special and meaningful. She said her encounters with the dancers meant nothing to her. I didn't understand this explanation. I told her she'd knelt with them. If she was already with them on the first day, why should I wait for a special event? It seemed like she was withholding intimacy as a reward for me while openly engaging with strangers in a provocative manner in front of her friends. I asked if she had any other encounters that were not captured on video. She said there weren't any. I said I wasn't sure. She said I should check her phone and social media to see if she was telling the truth. I figured she'd had enough time to edit her story and delete anything incriminating from her phone, but I didn't think I'd find anything. I said I'd look into it. She gave me all her passwords, even though she'd already admitted some of it during our conversation. I got the feeling she was still hiding something, which made me lose confidence in her. I decided to follow my father's advice and try to fix things with my wife. That evening, it seemed like she was too distant for me to share a room with her, so I suggested she sleep in the guest room. Despite my initial reluctance, I couldn't resist checking my wife's social media accounts. I figured she'd deleted all the evidence, but I kept getting distracted by thoughts that made it hard to focus on my work. I decided to check her social media to see what she was up to. I found myself checking her accounts a lot and realized it was a bad habit, even though she wasn't posting anything inappropriate. I was surprised at how many guys she was talking to. I noticed she was deleting messages, probably to hide them from me. When I tried to read a message, it would suddenly disappear. I wondered if this was a common thing for attractive women, even those who didn't post. The material she sent me was pretty provocative. Most of the men were from the Middle East and South Asia, which somewhat dispelled my fears. A week later, our relationship remained strained, but at least we talked. We hadn't been as close since I found out about the cheating, but my wife made efforts to restore our connection and was disappointed by my unwillingness to move forward. During a conversation, she suggested contacting a marriage counselor because she could no longer tolerate my behavior. I told her that I couldn't just brush aside what had happened by talking to someone. This affair was damaging our marriage, and the constant checking of her social media and messages was exhausting me. Despite my poor health, I decided to stop because I couldn't trust her. I started to worry that people were gossiping about me behind my back. One day I was at a bar with friends and saw that some acquaintances were chatting with I had a strong feeling that people were looking at me, but they quickly averted their eyes when I caught them doing it. Their behavior seemed to mock me at first, but after watching the video, I couldn't shake the feeling that everyone was secretly laughing at me. I felt disappointed, depressed, and even angry at times. I felt disrespected, which forced me to confront them and express I was really annoyed to see grown men acting like immature children. I suppose some people never really grow up. Instead of meeting them face to face, I decided to leave the bar and go home earlier than planned. It's been 2 weeks since I found out everything, and during that time I haven't been physically close to my wife. I was trying to get marriage counseling to move forward and mend my relationship with my wife. Her behavior was constantly present in my thoughts. My wife agreed to counseling sessions, and we arranged for a babysitter to look after the children while we attended. Before the first session, I was afraid that the therapist might put all the blame on me. I read about him on a website, but it turned out not to be what I expected. The therapist talked to my wife in a respectful but direct manner. I won't go into all the details, but it seemed to be a complex process aimed at encouraging my wife to be completely truthful and regain my trust. New information came to light, and my wife's answers made me wonder if there had been more similar cases, although we'll probably never know the full truth. I had my doubts about my wife's honesty, and it seemed that the therapist shared my skepticism. The therapist encouraged us to focus on reconciliation and gave us the tools to restore trust, but I was skeptical about this idea since my wife seemed to be hiding information from me by the third session. My wife had distanced herself from me, feeling like she was being attacked. I discovered new things about her that surprised me and made her comfortable. She even offered to find another therapist, but I decided not to go. She started making excuses like coming in late and having a busy work schedule, trying to stop us from going. Sometimes she canceled plans in advance without informing me. All these actions made me believe that she wasn't taking responsibility. 6 weeks after I found out about the betrayal, I ended up talking to a friend who told me about the video featuring my wife's life. I asked him how many people he knew who had seen it. Turns out he was one of the last in his circle of friends to find out. A lot of his schoolmates and most of his friends had already seen it. He said he found out by accident. I also told the guys who I was teased about this incident the other day, and it turned out that they knew about it too. It seems that most of the guys in our city were aware of the video, and I was the last to find out about it. It was a pretty awkward situation for me when I got home. I told my wife about my concern about the video being distributed widely and that it could still be spreading. She suggested moving to another area and even changing jobs. It was clear that she had been thinking about moving long before I mentioned the video. I had a feeling that she might have known about the rumors surrounding the video before I found out about it, suggesting that she might have discovered it before me. I decided to contact some of the friends who featured in the video. I thought it would be a good idea. Some of them are no longer friends with my wife, and others are still friends but may not be completely honest with me. I've been trying to contact some of her friends via Facebook to find out what they know, but so far none of them have responded. 3 months have passed since I discovered this, and I found out that I'd been having an intimate relationship with my wife. She'd been trying to seduce me around the house, and one night I finally gave in. This time it wasn't about love, it was about desire and disappointment. She decided to stay in the master bedroom for the first time after discovering this video. The next evening, she tried to resume intimacy, but I wasn't in the mood. I rarely refuse intimacy with my wife, so she was disappointed. She was ready to try in the bedroom what I always wanted, but I just couldn't do it. She tried to hug me, but it was too much. I put up with it one more night before reaching my limit and decided to sleep on the couch because I couldn't stand lying next to her. The next day, she expressed her disappointment at my suffering and suggested I get an annual pass to the gym. I declined, explaining that my problem was not physical intimacy with others but rather a lack of emotional connection with her despite her offer. After about 4 months of such emotional distance, I realized that I needed something deeper and more meaningful in my life. I called my father and told him about my difficulties with forgiving my wife and that I was thinking about a legal divorce. He suggested I temporarily move to another place for a few months, thinking that separation could bring clarity. When I returned home, I informed my wife of my decision to find a new apartment nearby so that I could see our children often, despite her objections. I made up my mind. A week later, I signed the lease for a furnished studio apartment near my house for a month. During this time, I struggled with the uncertainty of the divorce decision. The thought of living away from my children and leaving my wife weighed heavily on me. Despite all my efforts to stay in the marital home, I eventually came to the conclusion that a temporary separation from my wife was necessary for my mental well-being. I didn't want to move out completely, I just wanted to spend some time on my own. I kept the keys to the house where my work tools and equipment were. There was a big argument between my wife and me the night before I moved into the apartment. She was really upset and said she was giving me freedom during the whole process. She thought my actions were completely irrational and accused me of going crazy by leaving them because of something that happened when she wasn't even sure we were. In the relationship, I told her we'd already talked about this and that I still wasn't sure she was being completely open with me. I said I needed time to think things through. She asked how long we'd be living apart and I suggested 2 months, since most of my things were still in the house. We agreed to work on our relationship and move into a studio apartment, which gave me a sense of calm. The first day was difficult, as my wife was upset with me. She even told our 4-year-old. A year. My daughter, who I'd left at home, was upset with me. When I took the kids to kindergarten, my daughter B was in tears. She said her mom said I'd abandoned her. I told her I hadn't, and that I still took the kids to kindergarten every day. After dropping my daughters off at school, I called my wife to talk about how she was manipulating our kids by spreading lies. I told her not to involve them in our differences. She said she hadn't done anything wrong and that she'd lied about me because she thought I'd abandoned them. I reminded her that even though we don't live together, I still take care of my kids. The next day, I took them to kindergarten, and they seemed happy when I left for work. After finishing my work in the office, I went straight home. After work, I went to my client's construction site to complete several additional projects. When I got home, I rested and stuck to the same daily routine. I tried to limit my communication with people to avoid running into those who had seen the shameful video of my wife and to prevent further ridicule. My wife and I discussed the possibility of moving once we reconciled, but for now I was busy with work and kept mostly to myself. I hadn't had a chance to see my wife. We stayed in touch by phone, mainly about organizing our kids' schedules. She also brought me food sometimes. It was a quiet week without disagreements, breakdowns or constant requests from the kids. It felt like a mini vacation. I even thought about going back to our house once things calmed down. I decided I needed to be alone to collect my thoughts away from my wife and kids. I have friends who go on week. They invited me on long hunting trips to places like Montana and Arkansas every season. I used to hesitate because my wife always found reasons why I shouldn't go, but I usually agreed. This time, though, my friend was able to get a group discount for us, which made the trip more affordable despite the hunt being a month. I've already bought my ticket. We're going to travel in my buddy's van, and it's going to be a great time. It's something I've been looking forward to during these difficult times over the next few weeks. My daily routine remained the same until one day my wife called me in a panic because the dishwasher had stopped working. She asked me to come and fix it as soon as possible. When I got home, I was surprised at how different the living room looked. My wife had put up new curtains and the new sofa was now decorating the space. I was a bit perplexed, so I asked her about the sudden change. She explained that she wanted a change after successfully fixing the appliance. I went upstairs to pick up some things from the bedroom and noticed many new outfits that my wife had purchased. When we discussed this, she said that she had started going to the gym to focus on self. She's made some improvements and got herself in better shape. I couldn't help but feel a bit jealous watching her put in so much effort to improve herself. Was this redecorating really her way of getting away from our relationship? Despite knowing that leaving home was the right decision for my own well-being, I couldn't help but wonder. Despite my wife's reassurances, I still had doubts a couple of weeks later. With the onset of cold weather, she informed me that there was a problem with the oven. I went to fix it and noticed even more changes in the house. I hadn't seen my wife up close for a long time since I repaired the dishwasher. When I saw her waiting outside the house with our daughters, she was wearing baggy pajamas and I didn't notice that she had lost some weight. I mentioned it and she explained that she was focusing on self as we chatted. I got the feeling that she didn't want me to move in with her so much anymore. Why would that be to her? I was still just a handyman, taking care of the kids and contributing financially. I was still paying my share of the mortgage, and she was enjoying the benefits of having a man around without having to cook or have an intimate relationship with me. She seemed to be enjoying the benefits of two different lifestyles. When I told my wife about the upcoming hunting trip to Montana, I expected her to express concerns or objections. For example, she might have said it was risky or expensive. But she remained silent, asking. She didn't ask any questions or show any resistance. The discussion with her turned out to be much simpler than I'd expected, which made me feel pretty relaxed. I started to wonder if she'd moved on and wasn't bothered about me coming back. That's exactly the impression I got when I got back a week later and opened the car door for my daughters greeted me with delight, which surprised me. The eldest daughter asked if they would have a new dad, which took me aback. I assured her that I was not going anywhere and asked her why she asked. She mentioned that she had seen a man in the house while I was away. I thought she might have confused him with my brother-in-law, who used to live with us, but my daughter knew my brother-in-law. I was pretty sure she wasn't confusing him with someone else. I even asked her again, suggesting that she might be referring to Uncle Jimmy, but she was adamant the man's name was Jacob, a name I'd never heard before. I couldn't access my wife's social media and messages due to her changing passwords after I moved out and spent the whole day thinking about Jacob. I was trying to remember if my wife had mentioned him before as I got ready for the hunting trip. I noticed that my wife didn't seem as keen on reconciliation anymore. She just wanted me to come back and fix things, which made me think the worst. Turns out, the man named Jacob was romantically involved with my wife. I figured that if I acted insecure about him, my wife would deny knowing him, like she had done in the past when she tried to deny any wrongdoing and bullied me. So, in the evening while the kids were asleep, I decided to visit her. I thought I'd catch her off guard by turning up unannounced, but she didn't look shocked. Maybe it was because of my visits and reassurance, but we communicated politely. Despite this, we both still hoped we could salvage our relationship. I went in the house with I had the keys in my hand, and she noticed me. She offered me food, but I refused, saying I wanted to talk. We were sitting in the living room, and I immediately told her what I had learned about Jacob. I asked her why she was having an affair when we had agreed to focus on reconciliation. I studied her body language and language to see how she would react. She nervously ran her fingers through her hair, which was a clear sign that she knew she had been caught. Suddenly, she looked up and confessed that Jacob was just a work colleague. She said they had a strong working relationship and that she had turned to him for support since I wasn't there. I asked her to help with the housework. I kept asking her for details. I asked if she was sharing our bedroom. She seemed confused, so I asked her to explain. She admitted that she had slept with someone else twice. She said it was nothing more. I wasn't convinced about what she said about the 2 meetings. I knew there was more to the story. I asked her how long the relationship had lasted. She tried to blame me for abandoning her and the children. I realized she was avoiding the answer. I raised my voice and asked her for the answer. Then she finally admitted that she'd been in an emotional relationship with someone else for over a year and that things had moved on to a physical level. Looking back, I remembered my suspicions from marriage counseling when she tried to interrupt the session. The therapist sensed her dishonesty and urged her to be honest. Looking back, I realized that I might have been deceived from the very beginning. Our relationship was built on a fragile foundation because I never really knew who she was. I couldn't help but wonder about the length of their romance. Having read a lot about infidelity, I realized that a woman who entered into numerous relationships at a bachelorette party would not be satisfied with an ordinary relationship like ours. It was hard to believe her when she said that the physical connection only took place when I was not at home. I felt in my gut that there was more to the story when I asked her about the possibility of reconciliation, given how long she had been involved with this man. She offered no explanation. It was obvious that she had more than just 2 instances that she confessed to. When I asked her if she loved him, she hesitated for a moment before answering. I answered, feeling tired of her games. I noted that a woman who was intimate with 2 dancers and behaved inappropriately in the presence of her friends could not have done it only twice. I told her I was glad she was happy with him, but her actions gave me good reason to seek a legal divorce. I acknowledged that the time spent together with our 2 beautiful daughters was meaningful, but I suggested that it was time to end our relationship. At first, I doubted my decision to leave, but now I'm sure it was the right decision. I called her a lot to learn from her mistakes if I had continued to ignore them. If it hadn't been for the marriage therapist, I might have remained in the dark about my wife's deception and manipulation. I'm grateful to the therapist for helping me see the truth. Although she didn't directly point out my wife's dishonesty, I had enough intuition to decipher the deeper meaning of her questions and understand her point of view. It seemed that one lying person could easily recognize another. I was just an observer in their presence. Then it dawned on me that my wife knew how to hide her actions despite her declarations of love. When I was preparing to leave, I couldn't get rid of the suspicion that she was hiding something. I ignored her words and left that day. I went home feeling dejected, knowing I wouldn't get as much time with the kids as I wanted. Despite the finality of the situation, I was relieved to realize my suspicions of her infidelity had been confirmed. It was amazing how accurately the saying came true. As it turned out, my suspicions about her fidelity were correct. I'm not particularly religious, but I found it comforting to believe that the universe was aligning in my favor. That day, events seemed to unfold in a way that revealed the deception I had been unknowingly living with. That night, I slept soundly, comforted by the fact the truth had finally come out. If my friend hadn't mentioned the video, I wouldn't have had the revelations that occurred over the past few months, which revealed the truth about the woman I had been living with for 5 years. The next day, I called my father to tell him everything I had learned, and he said I'd handled the situation well and not to blame myself because I'm not responsible for anything. He also said everything happens for a reason, even if it means hidden truths become apparent. My main task is to ensure the safety of my daughters. I'm worried about the man my wife has brought into their lives, and I need to know more about him. I've heard stories about people who get into relationships with single mothers with daughters for bad reasons. I can't bear the thought of anything happening to my children. The next day, as usual, I went to pick up the children from kindergarten. My wife called me to talk about our situation. She said she still wanted to reconcile, promising to end her relationship with the other man. I reminded her that she had been involved with him for many years. The main issue was no longer in that she questioned my belief that their relationship had lasted for years, saying that they had only become physical recently when I left her and the children. I saw this as an attempt to shift the blame, and I wasn't convinced. I reminded her that while we were trying to reconcile, she decided to enter into a physical relationship and even brought a man to our house instead of taking revenge. I felt it was time to move forward with the divorce and focus on our daughters, since she had long since left our relationship. When I said this, she accused me of giving up first. By leaving home, I stopped talking to avoid an argument. Despite her attractiveness, I knew it wouldn't be difficult for her to find someone new, perhaps even better than me. I was hoping she'd find someone better suited for our daughters. The last thing I wanted was for her to bring random men into our house, putting our daughters at risk. The next day, I contacted my wife's colleague who had worked with her at the hospital and at her previous job for 2 years. I called her unexpectedly and told her about my recent work injury, mentioning that I needed a male physiotherapist. I asked about a guy named Jacob, who my wife had suggested, and if she knew anything about him. I phrased the question this way because I knew she was familiar with this workplace. She said she didn't know anyone named Jacob, and I realized my question had misled her. I was worried she might eventually ask my wife about it. I decided to talk to my wife about her lies about Jacob being her colleague. I couldn't wait to discuss this face to face. I was also concerned her colleague might call and tell her about the strange call she received from me as a result. I decided to take action and contact my wife to discuss the situation. I asked why she had lied to me about her partner in the affair, Jacob, with whom she had worked as a client for more than 2 years. I made it clear that I had a right to know who she brought around our daughters and why she had decided to hide this information from me. In response, she defended Jacob, explaining that he was a widowed businessman with several hotels nearby and posed no threat to our family. She claimed that he was an honest and reliable man whom she had known for a long time and who had turned to her for services after the tragic death. She said there was a strong bond between them, but she didn't want to take it any further because of her marital status. Surprisingly, after I left, she decided to start a romantic relationship with him. She tried to shift the blame onto me while admitting she was wrong. After talking to my wife's colleague, I had a strong suspicion that my wife had been in a physical relationship with one of her former wealthy clients for more than 2 years. I decided to check his background, and fortunately there were no records. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy, knowing that he was more successful than me. Despite this, I understood the need to find out the truth about my wife's secret adventures. After the bachelorette party, it was important for me to move forward and start anew. Some may say that a DNA test should be done for my daughters, but I believe that this is not necessary since they bear a great resemblance to me. In short, 2 months later, we ended our marriage and sold the house, dividing the profits. My wife moved in with her lover, who owns several properties. I moved to another city to start a new life with a clean slate. I found a better paying job and rented an apartment that had enough space for me and my daughters. I did everything I could to protect my girls from someone else's man. My wife was devastated when the court made me the main guardian. She was happy about it, though. Besides, the girls didn't want to live in the same house with a strange man. A year later, I married a beautiful woman who adored not only me but also my daughters. She replaced their mother as my ex. After a terrible motorcycle accident, she lost her leg and ended up in a wheelchair. This happened less than a month after the accident. It's been a while since her rich boyfriend left her without marrying her. Her lavish life disappeared, leaving only memories of her and gifts she sold to survive. She sometimes calls me and cries, longing for the life we had. But the past can't be returned. She chased after the wealthy and ended up in poverty and in a wheelchair.